Wonderful. Well, I wanted to take a look at some of the more recent developments that have been going on with Trump's foreign policy, because that is one of the most important things that's going on. Obviously, they've got the domestic policy, but the foreign policy, especially US aid, is stuff that's affecting the rest of the world, including Europe. So it's always interesting to look at. First, something that directs us even more, something that impacts us directly, is whether you've bought our merch or not, which you should do. This Islander merch is only available for a very limited time now before the release of Islander 3, so you should pick it up while you still can, or else Josh will not eat tonight.
It's true. I'm wasting away.
He's basically destitute without this, so...
Look at this. It's not even a ring of fat anymore.
There's not even a healthy paunch there now. It's just... waste. Anyway,
that's right.
So on the subject of US aid, something interesting came out that I saw earlier today that I wanted to highlight highlight attention to, which was that there is a small nation. If you want to know why US aid is, it's good that it's been paused for the 90 days, and hopefully most of it will be cut entirely, if not all of it, if we're perfectly honest, because it was literally just a way for the American deep state to fund leftism across the world. There is a tiny nation in Africa between South Africa and Mozambique called Eswatini that last year received $50.5 million of US aid, and that was to address the rampant HIV epidemic. And this person, Cringe Panda, has included an excerpt to show what kind of culture Eswatini has from a Substack post of somebody who went to go and conduct foreign aid there for a few years, and she explained her experiences while she was there. And she said it was an HIV vector, so there was HIV money available. At one point, a local HIV-related NGO purchased a billboard over the largest public transit hub in Eswatini, which said, "Are you thinking of raping a child today? Think twice of the consequences."
I mean, I agree with the sentiment.
Here's a picture of the billboard.
What?
Yep.
What? How is this real?
$50 million. $50 million to this country.
I think it's also worth mentioning as well that Eswatini, as its name suggests, is very small and is entirely surrounded by South Africa. Like, it's a little tiny dot on the map that you have to look quite hard to even see. So 50 million for such a small, basically a micronation, is a lot of money.
Which has such a problem with child sexual assault that you have to put up billboards for it. Is this what US taxpayer money was supposed to be going to? When the founders enshrined the Constitution and the other founding documents and the Declaration of Independence, is this what they thought their nation would be putting money towards less than 300 years later?
I'm going to try and sort of reconcile the rage of some of the American taxpayers in the audience and point out that it's a lot better than drag shows in Ecuador and and what was it, gender studies in Albania. At least it's preventing something that I think everyone wants to prevent.
That's true, but at the same time, I think a culture where you have to go this far is beyond repairing. And you can throw as much money at the wall as you want. It's not gonna do anything.
The thing is, that seems to suggest that the consequences they're worried about is
HIV.
HIV, not the psychological devastation of the child or anything.
Not just the moral awfulness of it in the first place.
Yeah,
there's a lot is awful and wrong with this picture, but that's just one of the things that I wanted to let everybody know. Your taxpayer money for the next little bit of time is not going towards. Another thing it's not going towards right now is apparently Rory Stewart's wife. She runs a company that has, let me see if I can find the name of it, the Turquoise Mountain Foundation, that was getting money from US aid, and now that the payments have been cut, she's lost out on $1 million.
Oh no, how terrible.
I know, so...
It's going to have to make money like everyone else.
So there's another thing we can blame US aid for, which is Rory Stewart in general.
Terrible crime.
I know. This is one of the greatest crimes America has ever committed against its allies, as far as I'm concerned. Funding Rory Stewart, and therefore, by proxy, the Rest is Politics podcast as well, with Alistair Campbell. So there's a whole network of evil going on there, but thankfully it's been cut off from some of its funds for now. But if we return to Africa, Josh mentioned in the last segment that Trump has been going against South Africa. I mentioned it yesterday, but to go into a little bit more detail of it from this foreign policy article talking about what's going on there right now. So he's cut aid to South Africa last week, and this was on the orders of an executive order that he signed due to unjust racial discrimination that's been going on against the Boers, and particularly the white farmers in South Africa, over the country's land reform law. He also cited South Africa's International Court of Justice genocide case against Israel, which is very funny coming from South Africa. An anti-South Africa stance was predicted by to be a key feature of the second Trump administration's foreign policy, given Pretoria, the capital of South Africa, their friendly relations with Russia and China, but few would have foreseen the executive order. South African media queried whether Trump was even aware that Afrikaners differed from English-speaking whites like his South African-born billionaire advisor Elon Musk. That doesn't matter. This foreign policy article is quite funny because it has quite a number of attempted gotchas in there, as you would expect from Nosmot Gabadamosi, who wrote it. So, yeah, don't you understand? He's not even English. These Afrikaners, they're not even English. Okay, don't care. Don't care. South Africa is discriminating against them, attempting to take property from them, abusing them, attempting to genocide them in its own little way. You've got mainstream politicians over there calling for a genocide of the Boers, saying kill the farmer, kill the Boer. I think that takes precedence over whether they speak English or not, which, by the way, they do.
What is the criticism here? That he's not being ethnocentric enough?
Apparently.
All right.
Apparently.
He's not just letting the South African government do unspeakable things. The fact that he's noticed and is now mentioning it, that's beyond the pale.
Well, we were talking about this in the office earlier on, which is that there's a hierarchy of evil that we have been taught in the modern liberal order, which starts off with, at the top, the very, very top, obviously, is the Nazis and Hitler. But just only slightly below that is Rhodesia and South Africa. South Africa for having the apartheid, which obviously was not a good thing and had very, very many problems which led directly to what's going on today. But Rhodesia basically for just being a functioning country in Africa, which is, you're not allowed, that's racist.
I think that the living standards in, pre-desegregation, both Rhodesia and South Africa were higher in the white minority rule. And in Rhodesia, it was far less explicit as well, in that they just had meritocratic standards, which it just so happened that many of the native population weren't able to meet. But
there was still representation within the government.
Yeah, and it was going along that way, yeah.
As well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but the South African government statement, the foreign ministry said, it's ironic that the executive order makes provision for refugee status in the US for a group in South Africa that remains amongst the most economically privileged, while vulnerable people in the US from other parts of the world are being deported and denied asylum despite real hardship. So basically, let us kill them. Just let us kill them. Let us kill them and then take our trash, our refuse from the rest of the world and give them all that they want. Imagine my shock that such a statement would come from the South African government. And the president, Cyril Ramaphosa, earlier said that his country would not be bullied. Despite this, though, the article carries on through gritted teeth to say the African National Congress Party has been unusually measured in its subsequent responses. Pretoria said it will send a delegation to Washington that's expected to include senior cabinet ministers and business leaders to explain its new law, worried that any further actions could rattle investors and tank South Africa's economy. Its booming economy, because they have no leg to stand on here.
Also, the ANC are in a pretty difficult political situation as well.
Yeah, they're no longer the majority party there, as far as I'm aware. At least they have the most seats, but they're not a full majority.
Yeah, they normally get above 50% of the vote, but as of the most recent election, they didn't, because Jacob Zuma's MK party helped split that vote, as well as just an overall fall in popularity because all of their infrastructure is failing.
As we saw in my segment yesterday. And the article again, more than 3 decades after the end of apartheid, about 70% of South Africa's farmland is still owned by white South Africans, who make up only 7% of the population. Their black counterparts are 80% of the population and own just 4%, making South Africa the world's most unequal nation, both in land use and income distribution. So the fact that...
Per capita, actually, they're being understood.
I know, right? But the idea that these Afrikaners, the Boer, who own the land, have owned the land for years, set up the land, settled the land, the fact that they still own it in and of itself, no matter what they're doing with it, whether they're being productive, feeding the country, whatever, that doesn't matter. It's the fact that they own it in the first place.
I wonder what they're 7% of the population. What is their percentage contribution to the GDP? Because it's funny that that's omitted, isn't it? I imagine they're disproportionately economically productive, and actually, even if they did requisition the land, what it would do would be massively damage the South African economy.
Well, I did see something that was very interesting, which was probably the worst case of GDP brain that I've ever seen, which was an argument that, yes, they do all the farming and they make all of the food, but the agricultural sector only brings in 2.5% of the overall GDP anyway. So therefore, you basically don't need it.
Don't want to grow your own food.
Isn't that what happened in Zimbabwe and Rhodesia? That
Yes.
the white farmers were displaced from their land one way or another, and then the agricultural output fell off a cliff.
Yes.
People started going hungry because the people who took over weren't horticulturalists, let's say.
Yeah, as soon, I think it was 1980, as soon as Mugabe took over, that year he introduced all of these land requisitions, and about 20 years later, because it took a while for the damage to be done, I think 1 million people had died of famine.
Who could have seen that one coming, eh?
Anyone with common sense, yeah.
That may be true, but we're talking about Zimbabwe.
That's true.
So they do also point out in this that Washington supposedly needs Pretoria as an ally because of the fact that they have a lot of platinum and other rare earth materials and metals there, and they also want to maintain it as an ally if they want to have any major influence in Africa or reverse China's hold on global minerals used in the AI tech race. So there is some give and take that's going here. Either way, it's good that Donald Trump is the one politician I can think of in my lifetime that's actually doing something to stick up for the white minority in South Africa, who have just been a hated and abused minority ever since the end of apartheid, really.
I'm glad he is, because I didn't expect it of him, but
No, I didn't.
I suppose with Elon Musk being so close to him, it's something that is obviously going to be close to him, being South African.
Yeah, and then there's all the other stuff going on with Donald Trump's foreign policy at the moment as well, where he's trying to use it as a transactional negotiating tool with a lot of foreign countries to try and negotiate better trade deals or better deals for cultural change and shifts in those countries themselves. But that's led to very entertaining articles from Foreign Affairs. This one written by David V. Joe, who is a former CIA analyst and operations officer.
I'm sure this is going to be unbiased.
Well, that's the interesting thing. I like looking into foreign affairs every so often because you get people like this. You get people like William Burns writing articles for it. So while they like to veil everything, it's an interesting way to see what's going on in the minds of the elite establishment right now, what they're talking about. And basically, this is an entire article, special pleading for the rights of the American intelligence agencies to not just be absolutely slashed to the bone, saying that, well, it needs to be experts speaking to other experts, industry and intelligence professionals speaking to intelligence professionals. Otherwise, you might end up with diminished reputation on the global scale. You don't want to send in a bunch of people who have no experience in intelligence to cut the whole thing because they have no idea what they're doing. Basically saying, well, these people you're sending in aren't already compromised.
Yeah.
We need them pre-compromised so they just do what we want. We're the CIA, goddammit. We've got a blank check to do whatever we want across the entire world. You can't stop us from doing that. And that's basically what he says quite plainly in one of the final paragraphs of this article, saying, putting the United States first from an intelligence perspective means harnessing intelligence diplomacy to safeguard American interests and citizens while protecting the liberal world order, which has advantaged the United States more than most other countries. Now, I would say that most American citizens themselves would question whether maintaining the liberal world order in Iraq or Afghanistan, or even today in Ukraine, has actually benefited them financially, culturally, even family-wise, because many of them will have potentially lost family members in Iraq and Afghanistan. So that's very interesting. What it's basically saying there is, again, business as usual. That's what we want. And there will be liberals and leftists saying, destroying the intelligence agencies, nobody voted for that. That's exactly what many in the MAGA movement were actively hoping would happen.
In fact, many MAGA voters said explicitly that it was one of the main things they were looking forward to.
Yeah, especially is it that Tulsi Gabbard is now National Director of Intelligence?
That's right, yeah.
Yes, so that'll be an interesting one to see how she progresses with that.
Because she was, of course, on a domestic terrorist watch list at one point from the intelligence agencies, and now she's directing them.
Yeah, and the other interesting thing that all of these agencies like to do is to try to say that they're non-partisan. They're non-political organisation. And if you come in and cut it, then that's political. But what we're doing globally to destabilise governments across the world is non-political, according to their own standards.
There's no such thing. Sorry.
It was one of the things I was hoping for. Trump came out ages ago, like a year or so ago, with a 10-point plan about dismantling, or at least damaging, the power of the intelligence services in various ways, from FISA courts, all sorts of things. Yeah, and it's sort of long overdue. If people are making the argument that no one voted for this, well, no one voted for them to become a type of shadow government in the first place. And this goes all the way back to Eisenhower. There's that famous clip, isn't there, of Eisenhower leaving office right at the very end of his tenure as president, saying, beware of a shadow government, a military-industrial complex, his words. Some people like to say the very concept of a military-industrial complex is tinfoil hat conspiracy theory. Well, it wasn't even in the 50s.
I mean, what was the name of the original CIA director when it was back in the OSS as well during the Second World War?
Well, the main one is Alan Dulles, but there were a few before him, like army generals. But he's sort of the famous one, the most famous one. But there were actually a couple before him. But you're probably talking about Alan Dulles.
Yeah. I'm just saying, like, you don't want some random, unaccountable person like that who's actually in charge of the government and actually in charge of what happens on the international stage in a supposed democracy, when the whole point of the liberal world order is for the sake of global democracy, which is the rule of unaccounted oligarchs, as far as I can tell, these days. But here's another insightful paragraph to see either how they want to present themselves and how barefaced the lying is, or how delusional these people are if it's the other way and they actually believe their own rubbish that they spout. Intelligence work necessitates good judgment, a measured temperament, and the integrity to go where the weight of the evidence leads. That means occasionally bringing unwelcome news to powerful political figures. I mean, I can agree with all of that so far, but here's his suggestions. To that aim, Trump should install experienced professionals in key national security and intelligence positions. The administration should not probe candidates for their views on the January 6th attack on the US Capitol or otherwise subject them to ideological litmus tests.
Why not? Why not?
Because it's bad. It's bad for them.
Right.
It's bad for them. Surround yourself with enemies, Mr. Trump.
Yeah.
Please, just surround yourself with incredibly powerful enemies.
Keep your noticing to a minimum.
Yeah. And on the subject of things that Trump is starting to do, that he promised that he would do, that people think he wasn't voted in for, which he explicitly was voted in for, and upsets the intelligence establishment, is that he's on the road to making peace talks with Vladimir Putin. Now, this hasn't just upset the American intelligence establishment, it's also upset the European establishment as well, which I will cover in a moment. But this all comes from the fact that he spoke on February 12th on the phone to Vladimir Putin without coordinating the details beforehand with Ukraine, and announced that negotiations to end the war would start immediately. And he's also thinking he might meet with Putin in person in Saudi Arabia as well. I mean, if they can get peace talks off the ground, and if they can actually establish some kind of peace, I see this as only a good thing. We've wasted enough resources trying to claw back territory for the sake of Ukraine. Ukraine's lost enough sons and daughters in the conflict, and frankly so has Russia as well. This conflict has been an unmitigated disaster.
I've heard recently someone reputable, I can't remember who it was, but saying maybe as many as 1 million casualties in that theatre of war.
Yeah.
I've heard that.
So a generation,
and it has displaced. Displaced people, and also one of the conditions that it might be for Ukraine as well is I believe that Ukraine has access to rare minerals and things as well.
It's also got some of the the richest farmland as well. It's called the breadbasket of Europe at one point.
Yeah, so for the sake of maybe negotiating a peace deal where they're able to save face, they can try to make up for some of the shortfalls that they could encounter with South Africa. I don't know what kind of rare materials that they have in Ukraine, but there could be some kind of wiggle room to try and negotiate that. Now, despite this, again, if we want to take a look at what's going on with the conflict on the ground to see what an unmitigated disaster this has been for Ukraine, because people like to point out, well, Ukraine's lost a lot less people overall than Russia has. Russia's lost more troops, but we found out in World War II and any ground war with Russia, really, that Russia's scariest factor is their ability to just send wave after wave after wave of people. They're basically like, it's an unstoppable horde that will constantly be going to you, advancing on you. That's what the Germans found out. They could take out as many people as they wanted, capture as many people, capture as much war material as they wanted. There would always be more on the way.
It's a very big nation, yeah.
Yeah, big shock, right? So here's a map of what's been going on, and the territory in red here, we can see this is the territory that's been taken by the Russians and under Russian military control. These little squiggles bits here are under limited Russian military control. They've been trying to push towards Kharkiv for ages, but they've not been able to make a proper advance on it. Obviously, they never really got to Ukraine. In terms of what Ukraine's been able to take in retaliation, is this. That little bit in the Kursk region of Russia. That's about it. What the hell did you just do to me? There we go.
I think it just refreshed.
Yeah, it did just refresh. Either way, this is a bit more of a zoomed in thing. But as you can see, Russian territorial gains a lot better. Ukraine has not gained anything from this. And the idea that Zelensky's like, well, what we can do is we can do a land swap. Okay, you've got this much land, they've got this much land. Do you have a leg to stand on?
I think
no, you don't.
The past few months have been trying to capture as much territory as possible to get the best position to negotiate. I think that's what's been going on.
No, I agree that that's what they've been trying to do. They've just not really got anything to be able to negotiate at the table with, other than just being able to say, let's make peace, especially now that they've got Donald Trump in the corner saying he wants to negotiate peace. Again, I think this is a good thing.
Remarkably few battlefield successes from the Ukrainian side, considering they've been given hundreds of billions of dollars, both in money and just materiel, and the amount of men they've lost. It's got to show for it on the battlefield.
I mean,
very little.
The main success that I can tell is that a number of times they have been able to push back Russian forces, but the successes have been almost entirely defensive.
I think that, they've succeeded in not having their entire country taken over by the Russians. That's a success, I suppose.
They've succeeded in pushing the Russians to the point where they want to negotiate again by the fact that Russia's bogged down a lot more than they were expecting to. I think they were expecting to steamroll this, because what was this supposed to be, a 2-week special military operation at first, or police operation, as they were calling it? So it's been terrible for both sides, which is why it should stop. And it certainly should stop before it's escalated to the point where European troops and NATO troops are on the ground as well, because that would proceed into a hot war with Russia, which nobody wants. There's been a number of threats over the past 3 years, and it's never happened. I don't think it is going to happen. But still, if there's a 1% chance that it happens, if the conflict extends on as long as possible, you don't want that.
It probably should have stopped, when was it, like a couple of years ago, when Boris personally went out there and said, no, don't strike a deal with Zelensky. That would
support you to the bitter end.
Yeah, for as long as it takes. Or until there are different bureaucrats in the State Department and Pentagon, at least. But no, as long as it takes.
Yeah.
Until there's a new president. But
Boris Johnson saw his Churchill moment. He saw his Churchill moment, but then he got ousted. Then he got ousted for having parties.
Do you remember when Zelensky visited Congress and they were lauding him, people like Schumer and Pelosi calling him the Churchill of our age and stuff? It's just nonsense, isn't it? It was all pathetic. It was all nonsense.
It's not great, but as you can imagine, Europe, as I mentioned, feeling a little bit left out, feeling like they're sat in the cook chair on this. They all signed this agreement. The Weimar Plus statement.
Interesting choice.
Weimar Plus. All right. Okay. Interesting. Saying we're ready to enhance our support for Ukraine. So we just keep pushing it even further. We commit to its independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity in the face of Russia's war of aggression. We share the goal to keep supporting Ukraine until a just, comprehensive, and lasting peace is reached. This is basically just them saying publicly, please get us to the table as well. We don't want to be shown to be as pathetic and ineffective as we have been. Please get us to the table so we can try and save face with this as well. We're looking forward to discussing the way ahead together with our American allies. But one of the most ridiculous things, and yet at the same time most predictable things that I've seen regarding this, is what happens when when the peace talks have been concluded. If they go forwards, there's going to be a discussion on the territory that's kept by the Russians, which territory is given back to the Ukrainians, etc. There's going to need to be a transition period. In that time, who's going to administer the transition period? Because Hegseth himself has said that American troops will not be on the ground in Ukraine in this scenario.
The Ukrainians have been pretty keen for British troops because we've been a key supporter of them, and they see us as a reliable ally. So it might well be that it maybe us, the French and the Germans send in troops, maybe some of their neighbours as well. And it might be a joint European effort. I don't know how it's going to go, to be honest.
You could see that potentially, but again, EU member states, NATO members as well, there's the worry that if any conflict breaks out between them and any Russian troops due to any complications or something, there is some worries there. So foreign policy, again, have a genius solution. The Global South. The Global South, not Europe, should play peacekeeper in Ukraine. Send the Rwandans in.
Well, they're a bit busy at the moment.
Send the Congolese in.
They're a bit busy as well.
Exactly. It'd be a perfect diversion if we're supporting the Rwandans, right? But really what this seems to be is just a, again, special pleading. Let the diversity into Ukraine. Please let the diversity into Ukraine. It's one of the most homogenous nations in Europe still, just like the rest of Eastern Europe. Please diversify it. Which always seems to be the ultimate goal of a lot of foreign policy. Under the liberal world order is to make sure that homogenous European nations get their nice injection of diversity. So hopefully this doesn't come to pass, but they're suggesting here that African, Asian, Latin American nations should provide troops rather than the EU themselves, and a wide number of peace initiatives and proposals coming from countries such as Indonesia, Mexico, and the African delegation that visited Kiev and Moscow suggest there's a real willingness by these non-aligned states to play a significant role.
I can see the justification for it because they have less skin in the game, don't they?
Yeah, that's true, but I can't help but see that this would be, in a similar way to how France treated the Rhineland in the interwar period after the First World War, an excuse to get diversity into a European nation. So that's always the first concern at the top of my mind these days when it comes to these kinds of conflicts. But either way, I hope that Donald Trump's foreign policy can actually manage to achieve peace in Ukraine and in Russia, because generally speaking, this is a very, very daring, brave statement. I think masses of people dying in war is a bad thing.
I agree.
Absolutely. There's been enough blood spilt.
Especially for a lost cause.
It's just crazy, though, that's the first I've heard of that make the Global South the peacekeepers in Ukraine. It's like, let's have a demilitarised zone on the Mexican border and have it staffed by Lithuanians.
Yeah, why not?
Or something.
Send the Estonians in.
Yeah.
The Finnish Peace Corps is going to sort out Mexico.
Yeah. There's problems in Guatemala. Send in a special Hungarian crack squad of commandos.
Tell you what would be funny.
Why not?
Send in Albanians onto the US border. Known people smugglers. No, don't actually.
They'd just they'd just roll straight into the cartel, wouldn't they?
A great way to get rid of the cartel is just import a different
Albania.
Their people smuggling operations would become more efficient if you put Albanians in charge.
That's true, yeah.
The Mexicans are even worse now. How did this happen?
Hi folks, thanks for watching. If you would like more from us, you'd like to support us, help us keep the lights on, because of course we're still demonetized on this channel, go over to lotus.com and sign up for only £5 a month and watch Beau's unbelievably detailed series on the fall of the Roman Republic. Now, you can easily find an hour-long video which will tell you the broad strokes of what happened with the triumvirate and the civil war and the death of Pompey and how Caesar gets stabbed, etc., etc. But Beau has done something in the order of about 20 hours of content going into the most minute details on this. Now, I appreciate that's not everyone's cup of tea, but There's a huge amount in there you will not be aware of, and I personally have been really enjoying it. So come and support us, sign up, and watch the best stuff that we have. Also, go and follow us on lotuseaters_com on X, and we'll see you next time.